He woke up early, just as the sky was beginning to lighten with the first pale streaks of dawn. The quiet hum of the neighborhood was still, broken only by the occasional bird or the soft rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. He stretched his arms and let out a slow breath, taking a moment to appreciate the silence before the day began. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee, a comfort he allowed himself every morning. His dog, a strong, loyal companion, padded quietly across the room and nudged his hand. The dog's eyes were bright, intelligent, and full of trust, and he smiled as he scratched behind the ears. They had a routine, simple and unbroken. First, a walk around the block, then breakfast, a few quiet hours spent reading or listening to music, and eventually, the day would unfold with errands or small projects, but it was in these small, ordinary routines that he found peace, a sense of control and calm that the world outside could not disturb. He watched his dog stretch, shake off the sleep, and wait patiently at the door. Together, they stepped outside, the early morning air crisp and fresh against their skin. The streets were quiet, almost empty, and the city seemed to hold its breath. The dog sniffed at every corner, curious and cautious, exploring the familiar streets as if seeing them for the first time. He laughed softly, feeling a surge of warmth at the dog's boundless energy. This animal had been with him through every shift in life, through the moments he had chosen to leave behind, and through the quiet days he had worked hard to create. There was a deep bond between them, one that went beyond words. The dog was more than a companion. He was a reflection of the loyalty and trust that the man valued above all else. As they walked, he noticed small things in the neighborhood that most people overlooked. The way the sunlight caught on a window, the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery, the faint hum of a distant train. He liked observing these little details. They reminded him that the world was alive, even when it felt still. The dog trotted beside him, alert and protective, always aware of its surroundings. There was comfort in the dog's presence, a reassurance that he was not alone in this world, no matter how ordinary it appeared to the outside eye. At home, the routine continued. He poured a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the small kitchen. The dog sat patiently, watching him with eager eyes, tail wagging slightly. Breakfast was simple: eggs, toast, and a little fruit. He shared a small piece of his toast with the dog, who accepted it with a soft, appreciative sniff. Afterward, they settled into the living room. He picked up a book, though his mind wandered sometimes, thinking about the past, about moments that were better left unspoken. The dog rested at his feet, sensing the shifts in mood, offering quiet companionship that required no words. Despite the calm life he had built, there were shadows in his past that he carried silently. The years of service in an elite military unit were far behind him, but the lessons, the skills, and the memories lingered. He rarely spoke of them, even to himself. There was no pride in the violence, no glory in the danger. It was a part of who he had been, and it had shaped him in ways that even he did not fully understand. The contrast between the life he now lived and the one he had left behind was stark. Outside, neighbors saw a quiet man, a dog owner, someone polite and reserved. They had no idea of the history beneath the surface, no inkling of the intensity that had once defined his everyday. He spent the morning tending to small chores, repairing a loose handle on the kitchen drawer, wiping down counters, and organizing a small shelf of books. The dog followed him everywhere, attentive and curious, occasionally tilting its head as if trying to understand every movement. There was a rhythm to these simple acts, a kind of meditation in the repetition. The man found comfort in order, in small tasks that gave him control over his environment. Outside, life moved on. Cars passed, children laughed, and the world carried on, oblivious to the quiet discipline that existed inside the apartment. Around midday, he stepped outside again, this time to run errands. The dog walked with him, leash in hand, eyes bright with excitement at the prospect of new smells and sights. He stopped at a small corner store, greeting the cashier with a nod and a quiet smile. The dog waited patiently, tail wagging, occasionally sniffing at the floor or the faint scent of other animals. People passed by, some offering a friendly smile, others too absorbed in their own lives to notice. He liked this anonymity. It allowed him to exist without explanation, to be just another person walking through the city streets with his dog. After the errands, they returned home, and he prepared a small lunch. The dog sat beside him, eager for scraps and bits of food, content with anything offered. He ate slowly, savoring the taste and the quiet moment. Outside, the sun had risen higher, casting warm light across the apartment. He watched it shift through the window, catching the dust in golden rays. There was beauty in the mundane, in the moments often overlooked. The dog stretched lazily on the floor, sighing softly, completely at ease. In the afternoon, he spent time on small personal projects. Sometimes he wrote letters, not to anyone in particular, but to document thoughts and reflections. Other times he tinkered with electronics, repairing old gadgets or assembling small tools. The dog watched him work, occasionally pawing at an object or nudging him for attention. Their companionship was steady and unspoken, a mutual understanding that went beyond words. The man found peace in the dog's presence, a reminder that loyalty and love were still possible, even in a world that often felt harsh and unpredictable. As evening approached, he prepared for a quiet walk before nightfall. The city had changed in his absence, streets busier now, voices louder, lights brighter. The dog walked calmly beside him, alert but trusting. They passed familiar faces and locations, neighbors who offered nods or brief greetings. He returned them politely, but kept his attention mostly on the dog, ensuring its safety and comfort. Every movement, every glance was precise, careful, informed by instincts honed over years he rarely discussed. But these instincts were now tempered by patience and restraint, by the conscious choice to leave the past behind. Returning home, he let the dog rest while he prepared dinner. The kitchen smelled of cooked vegetables and lightly seasoned meat. The dog sat nearby, watching expectantly, tail swishing gently. They ate together in silence, a quiet rhythm that required no explanation. Afterward, he cleaned up, ensuring the apartment was tidy before settling down in the living room. He poured a cup of tea and sank into a chair, the dog curling up at his feet. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to the quiet life unfolding in the apartment. As night fell, he opened the window slightly to let in the cool air. The dog's ears twitched at the distant sounds of the city, sirens, voices, a car passing slowly down the street. He reached down and stroked its head, feeling the warmth and weight of the creature that had become a constant in his life. There was a comfort in this touch, a reassurance that despite the uncertainties of the world, some things remained steady. The dog rested its head on his foot, eyes half closed, completely trusting. Before bed, he sat quietly reflecting on the day. The routines, the small victories, the moments of calm, they were all precious. He knew life could change in an instant, that peace was fragile and fleeting. But in this small apartment, with his loyal companion at his side, he found a measure of stability. The past, with all its intensity and danger, felt distant, almost like a dream. Yet he carried it within him, a quiet force that shaped his every decision and action. He prepared the bed for the night, making sure the dog had a comfortable spot nearby. The animal settled immediately, curling into a ball, eyes closing as if surrendering to sleep. He lay beside it, feeling the steady breathing, the warmth, the life that reminded him of purpose beyond the past. Outside, the city lights glimmered, distant and calm. Inside, there was peace, fragile but real, the kind of peace that one fought silently to maintain every day. As sleep approached, he allowed his mind to wander briefly to memories long past. Missions, training, challenges faced and survived, all of it flashed quickly like shadows passing over sunlight. But he did not dwell. He reminded himself that he was here now in this life with this dog in this small sanctuary of calm. The bond they shared, simple and profound, was enough to anchor him. The quiet companionship, the shared routines, the trust and loyalty, they were all he needed to feel grounded. Finally, he closed his eyes, the dog stirring slightly before settling fully. The night was calm, undisturbed. The apartment was filled with quiet breathing and the soft sound of the city far away. For now, all was well. The world outside could wait. Here, in this ordinary, peaceful life, he had found a space to simply be, a space to heal, to live, and to care for the one creature that had become more than a pet, a true companion. And as sleep claimed him, he held on to the thought that tomorrow would be much the same, simple, quiet, and shared with the loyal friend who understood him without words, a bond stronger than anything else in the world. For now it was enough. The afternoon was quiet at first, the kind of quiet that makes the sudden noise feel louder than it really is. He had just returned from a short walk with his dog, letting it rest while he prepared some paperwork at the kitchen table. Outside, the city hummed in the usual way, cars passing, distant voices, and the faint siren of an ambulance somewhere far off. He didn't pay much attention to it. The world outside had always been background noise, something to navigate calmly and carefully. Then came the sound of boots on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate, unfamiliar. The dog lifted its head, ears perked, a low growl forming in its throat. The man froze for a moment, sensing tension before seeing anything. He knew that sound, the kind of intrusion that usually meant authority, but something about it was off. He set down his pen and went to the window, peering out to see two officers at the door. Their uniforms were crisp, badges glinting, hands hovering near their belts. He opened the door cautiously, smiling politely, trying to mask the unease rising inside him. "Good afternoon," he said, voice calm, steady. The officers nodded, introducing themselves and saying they were responding to a call. He listened, nodding, trying to understand the situation. They mentioned a report of a threat in the area, something about a dog acting aggressively. He frowned, glancing at his companion, who was now standing close to him, tail stiff, eyes alert. The dog, sensing the tension, stepped forward slightly, placing itself between him and the strangers. Its growl deepened, not out of fear but warning. He knelt, whispering quietly, trying to calm it down. "Easy, boy. It's okay. Stay calm." But the officers didn't see it that way. To them, the dog's behavior seemed aggressive, a potential threat. Their hands tightened near their belts. He tried to explain, to describe the dog's personality, how it had never shown aggression without reason. The words barely reached them. Suddenly, one officer drew a taser, the other reaching for a firearm. He froze, mind racing, assessing, calculating. The dog barked sharply, lunging just slightly, not to attack but to warn. The officers panicked, shouting commands he knew were unnecessary. "Back, back! On the ground!" The man raised his hands, voice steady, trying to de-escalate. "It's okay, calm down." "He's not dangerous." But the officers were already on edge, convinced they were in danger. Then came the shot. A deafening sound, sudden and violent. The dog yelped, collapsing to the floor. Time seemed to slow. He dropped to his knees beside it, hands shaking, heart pounding, disbelief washing over him. The dog's eyes met his, full of trust and pain, and he felt a rush of grief so intense it left him momentarily breathless. "No, no!" he shouted, voice cracking. He cradled the animal, tears spilling freely, unaware of the neighbors peeking from windows, whispering in shocked tones. The officers looked at him, still tense, unsure of how to react. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw grief, anger, and disbelief, but nothing of the man's past. They didn't know that beneath the calm exterior was someone trained to survive, to act with precision, and to make decisions that others could barely comprehend. For now, though, he simply held his companion, mourning, silently promising to remember every moment, every detail of their life together. The adrenaline surged, but he restrained himself. He knew instinctively that any sudden move could escalate the situation. He had lived through chaos far more dangerous than this, and he had learned that patience, observation, and control were often more powerful than immediate action. His mind worked quickly, cataloging the scene, the officers' movements, the exit routes, every element around him. But for the moment, grief held him in place, grounding him in the loss that had just occurred. He noticed the small details, the dog's paw, the way its head tilted slightly, the tiny whimper it made before falling still. He traced the outlines of its body with trembling hands, feeling a bond severed too suddenly. Neighbors began to emerge from their homes, some whispering, others watching in stunned silence. They saw a man kneeling over a lifeless animal, anger and sorrow etched deeply on his face. But they didn't see the history behind him, the battles he had survived, the discipline that now kept him from reacting in ways that would have been catastrophic. The officers, shaken themselves, tried to speak. "Sir, one began. He shook his head, standing slowly, eyes never leaving the fallen animal. "No words," he said, voice low but filled with intensity. "No words are coming out right now." The air was heavy with tension, charged with unspoken questions. Who had called? Why had they come? Why had they acted so quickly, so violently against something that posed no real threat? He stepped back, breathing heavily, heart still racing. The officers tried to explain, to justify, to say it was a mistake, but nothing could undo what had happened. The man didn't respond, only looked at them, assessing, calculating, remembering. He made a silent decision, not vengeance yet, not openly, but observation, documentation, and understanding. He would not act recklessly. He would not let grief blind him. Instead, he would remember everything, and when the time came, they would understand the consequences of their actions. Neighbors began talking quietly among themselves. Some expressed sympathy, some fear. They noticed the calm yet intense presence of the man, the way he moved, the careful way he handled the situation. There was something different about him, something beneath the surface that they could not identify but instinctively felt. He did not raise his voice, did not lash out, did not show chaos. There was control, discipline, and an undercurrent of power that made them step back even in their shock. He finally moved indoors, closing the door gently behind him. The apartment felt impossibly quiet, the absence of the dog echoing in every corner. He sank into a chair, staring at the floor where the animal had fallen. Memories flooded back, the walks, the mornings, the quiet evenings, the small habits and routines that had become a shared language between them. Tears came again unbidden as he let himself mourn fully, knowing that grief was as necessary as it was inevitable. After a time he stood, moving methodically. He collected the dog's favorite toys, blankets, and belongings, placing them carefully in a box. Each item carried memory, each item carried love. He did not rush, did not falter. His movements were precise, deliberate, almost ceremonial. In his mind he catalogued every detail of the officer's behavior, the timing, the commands, the way they had responded to the dog. Every observation mattered. This was not merely grief. It was preparation, mental mapping, understanding the full scope of what had occurred. As evening approached, he went to the window and watched the street. The officers had left, but the neighborhood buzzed with whispers, questions, and quiet speculation. He felt their eyes on him, felt the weight of their curiosity, their unspoken judgment, and yet he remained calm. He did not yell, did not confront. He allowed the tension to build silently, knowing that patience would be more effective than immediate confrontation. Every instinct in him, trained through years of rigorous discipline, guided his restraint. The night fell, bringing darkness and a strange stillness. He lit a small lamp in the living room, casting warm light over the apartment, over the empty spaces where his companion once lay. The grief was deep, almost suffocating, but he did not break. Instead, he began to plan quietly, mentally preparing for the next steps. Documentation, observation, understanding who had called, what had motivated the action, and how the consequences might unfold. This was not revenge, not yet. It was control. It was strategy. He thought about the dog constantly, remembering its loyalty, its joy, its energy. He remembered the way it had nudged his hand on difficult days, the way it had rested quietly beside him when life felt heavy. Each memory was vivid, sharp, and painful. And yet in that pain there was also clarity. Life, even in its smallest companions, was precious, and the loss of such a bond was not something he would ignore or forget. It would shape his actions, inform his choices, and guide him in the days to come. Late into the night, he sat at the table, reviewing the events repeatedly in his mind. He wrote notes, small details about timing, about the officer's movements, about the exact sequence of events. Every word, every gesture mattered. He understood that the world outside saw him as an ordinary man, but they did not know the depth of skill, experience, and intelligence he carried. For now, that remained a secret, hidden beneath the calm exterior, a force waiting quietly beneath the surface. He did not sleep much that night. The apartment felt different, hollow in places where his companion had been. The quiet was sharp, almost accusatory, but he remained disciplined. He ate lightly, drank water, and moved through the apartment with careful precision. Every action was deliberate, a reflection of the life he had chosen to leave behind, and yet a reminder of the skills that still defined him. Grief was not weakness. It was fuel, sharpening his awareness, focusing his mind, and reminding him of the bond that had been broken. By morning, the neighborhood had moved on in its usual way. People went about their routines, unaware of the intensity that had unfolded just a day prior. He watched from the window, noting their indifference, their oblivion. But he was ready. Not for immediate action, but for observation, for understanding, for control. The dog was gone, but its presence lingered in every corner, in every memory, in every movement he made. And he would carry that forward, silently, carefully, knowing that the world had changed in ways that were not yet visible, but were inevitable. He sat quietly in the early morning light, the apartment still and calm. Though his mind was far from peaceful, the loss of his companion had carved a hollow ache inside him, one that he carried silently but intensely. As he traced the patterns of sunlight across the floor, memories from a life long left behind began to surface. Not the ordinary memories of childhood or school, but the ones that were sharp, precise, and dangerous. The life that had forged him into someone the world could not easily understand. He had been trained in one of the most elite units, a place where only the strongest, most disciplined, and most intelligent could survive. Each day had been a test not just of skill but of endurance, judgment, and the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. Missions were unpredictable, violent, and often deadly. One mistake could mean the end, not just for him but for his entire team. He remembered the intensity of the drills, the weight of responsibility, the constant awareness that the next moment could demand every ounce of his skill to survive. The dog, innocent and loyal, had never known this side of him. That world had been behind him, tucked away like a locked room in his mind. Yet now, after the tragedy, the memories returned unbidden. He remembered the first time he had been chosen, the rigorous selection process that pushed him to physical and mental limits he had never imagined. He recalled the long days of training, where sleep was a luxury and mistakes were punished not by words but by failure itself. He remembered learning to move silently, to anticipate danger, to act with precision when life depended on it. As he moved through the apartment, his hands unconsciously mimicked the motions he had once practiced endlessly, checking corners, noting lines of sight, calculating distances. These were habits formed through necessity, etched into muscle memory. He glanced at the empty space where his dog had slept, and a wave of sadness mingled with a strange sense of clarity. Grief sharpened his mind rather than clouded it. The instincts that had kept him alive in war were alive now, focused not on the enemy but on understanding what had happened, why, and who was responsible. He thought of missions long past, nights under foreign skies, navigating hostile territory with nothing but limited information, relying on instinct, training, and sheer will to survive. He remembered moments when a single decision had meant life or death for his team. He recalled the trust, the unspoken bonds, the way every member relied on the others implicitly, knowing that hesitation could be fatal. That trust had shaped him, instilled discipline, and taught him the value of patience and observation. Back in the apartment, he sat at the table, remembering the precise planning required for each operation, the maps, the intelligence reports, the contingencies. Every movement, every action was calculated, rehearsed mentally countless times before execution. Failure was not an option, and yet amidst all the precision and danger, he had learned restraint, the importance of waiting, watching, and striking only when necessary. Those lessons now shaped his response to the tragedy with his dog. He would not act recklessly. He would not allow anger to guide him. He would plan, observe, and ensure that when he acted, it was measured and deliberate. He recalled the way he had trained his body to endure extreme conditions, freezing temperatures, blazing heat, lack of sleep, and physical exhaustion. Endurance was not merely physical but mental, the ability to remain calm, to think clearly, and to make rational decisions when everything around him demanded panic. These skills, honed over years, were now quietly present in his daily life. Most people would never guess, seeing only a quiet man in a small apartment. Yet beneath the surface, the mind of a trained operative remained alert, precise, and controlled. Memories of teamwork also surfaced. The reliance on others, the unspoken coordination, the way a glance or a subtle gesture could convey critical information in the heat of danger. Those bonds had been life-saving, and while he now lived alone, the lessons of trust, loyalty, and responsibility remained with him. They had shaped not only his skills but his character, the way he approached relationships, work, and even grief. The bond with his dog had reflected that loyalty, a simpler form of the trust he had once relied on in life-or-death situations. Losing it had reopened a wound, reminding him of the fragility of connection and the responsibility that came with care. He thought about his own discipline, the ability to remain calm when confronted with the unexpected, the ability to assess danger, measure risk, and act with precision. The officers had not known who they were confronting. They saw a man grieving over a dog, but they did not know the depth of skill, the rigor of training, the capacity for action that lay just beneath the surface. He did not want them to know yet. There was no purpose in revealing everything now. Observation and understanding were the priorities, and patience was part of the discipline he had learned decades ago. The memories shifted again to the harshest missions he had faced. Times when he had been outnumbered, outgunned, and forced to improvise under extreme pressure. He recalled the way fear could be used as a tool, the way calm could intimidate, and the way precision could compensate for chaos. Every mission had reinforced the value of planning, the importance of awareness, and the necessity of patience. Those lessons were now part of him, inseparable from the grief he carried. He could feel the tension building inside, but he did not give in to it. He allowed it to sharpen his mind, focusing on what needed to be done rather than what he wished had not happened. Even as he remembered the intensity of past missions, he also remembered the moments of quiet that had been rare but cherished. Nights alone, reflecting, preparing for the next challenge, or simply resting in small moments of peace. The lessons of discipline and self-control had been reinforced in those times, teaching him that calm was often more powerful than action. He now applied that same calm to the tragedy in his apartment, not suppressing grief, but channeling it into clarity, observation, and preparation. He spent hours revisiting these memories, allowing the experiences to guide his thoughts and strategies. He considered every detail of the officer's visit the previous day, comparing it to his own knowledge of tactics and behavior. He noted patterns, anticipated responses, and considered outcomes. This was not obsession. It was preparation, a mental exercise that helped him regain a sense of control in a world that had suddenly felt unpredictable. The training of years had instilled in him the ability to manage chaos with composure, and that skill now became his anchor. The afternoon passed with quiet reflection. He moved through the apartment methodically, checking locks, windows, and corners not because he feared immediate danger, but because vigilance had become second nature. His body moved with precision, each action deliberate, a reflection of years when hesitation could cost lives. The memories of Delta Force training were not just past experiences. They were the foundation of his instincts, shaping every decision, every thought, and every emotion. The bond with his dog, now broken, became a lens through which he viewed loyalty, trust, and responsibility, reinforcing lessons learned in both war and peace. As evening fell, he sat by the window looking out at the street below. The city moved on in its usual rhythm, oblivious to the intensity of the life he carried within him. Cars passed, voices echoed, and lights flickered in windows. He thought about the officers, about the mistakes made, about the tragedy that had occurred. And yet he remained calm. The training had taught him that panic and anger cloud judgment. Observation, patience, and careful planning were the tools of survival. Grief was present, sharp and painful, but it was a tool as well, a reminder of what mattered, of the loyalty and love that deserved recognition and care. He allowed himself brief flashes of the past, not only the missions, but the camaraderie, the trust, and the discipline. The harsh conditions, the relentless challenges, and the quiet moments of reflection had shaped him. They had taught him the value of preparation, patience, and control. And now, facing grief, he applied those same lessons. The officers did not know it, the neighbors did not know it, but he carried within him the skills of someone trained to survive, to observe and to act with precision. By nightfall, he had organized his thoughts, documented observations, and reflected deeply on his training and its application to the present moment. He realized that the grief he felt was intertwined with his past, reinforcing lessons rather than weakening him. The bond with his dog had been powerful, but it was also a reminder of responsibility, vigilance, and the consequences of action. He understood that patience, observation, and careful planning were the only ways forward, and he committed himself to those principles silently, steadily, with discipline. He prepared for sleep. Though rest would not come easily, the apartment was quiet, empty in ways that felt unnatural after years of shared life with his companion. He lay in bed, eyes open, reflecting on memories both recent and distant. The Delta Force training, the missions, the loyalty of comrades, the discipline, the patience, all of it returned to guide him. Grief and memory intertwined, shaping the clarity of thought that he would need in the days to come. The city outside moved on unaware as he embraced the calm, disciplined focus that had always defined him, ready for whatever would come next. The next morning, he woke with the same quiet discipline he had maintained for years. Sleep had been restless, filled with fragments of memory, grief, and calculation. The apartment felt heavier without his companion, but he did not let despair take hold. Instead, he focused on what he could do, observing, learning, and preparing. He knew that the officer's actions the previous day had consequences, and he intended to understand them fully before acting. He began by reviewing the small details he had noted the day before. The timing of the officer's arrival, their gestures, the way they spoke, the tools they carried. Everything mattered. Every motion, every glance, every word provided insight. While most people might have been overwhelmed with grief or anger, he allowed these feelings to sharpen his awareness. Patience had always been one of his greatest assets, and now it was his primary tool. He wrote everything down in meticulous detail. Not just what happened, but what he observed about the neighborhood, the call that had brought them, and the possible witnesses. Even small details like the way a neighbor had peeked from a window or the way the sun had reflected off a car were cataloged. These notes were not for anyone else. They were for him, a way to understand and control a situation that had been forced upon him. By mid-morning, he left the apartment for a quiet walk through the neighborhood. The streets were busier now than they had been during his early morning routine. Children played outside, cars moved slowly in traffic, and neighbors went about their routines. He noticed everything: the angles of windows, the potential escape routes, the patterns of movement that people did not even think about. His mind worked constantly, combining observation with calculation. Every detail mattered because mistakes in judgment could be costly. At a small park, he stopped and watched people interact. He observed the way some spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously over shoulders. He thought about the officers and the call that had brought them. Someone had reported a threat, but was it deliberate or accidental? He cataloged possibilities: a misunderstanding, a neighbor's misjudgment, or something else entirely. Every scenario had consequences, and he considered each carefully, weighing the potential risks and outcomes. When he returned home, he began documenting his findings more formally. Using a notebook, he wrote detailed accounts of the officer's movements, the timing, and the context of the situation. He included diagrams of the apartment layout, the street outside, and the positions of everyone involved. It was methodical work, almost ritualistic, but it provided a sense of control over a chaotic event. He was not yet planning confrontation. He was preparing, observing, and understanding. Afternoon came, and he decided to visit nearby stores and businesses to ask discreet questions. He did not make it obvious. He walked casually, greeting storekeepers with polite smiles while subtly gathering information. Did anyone notice the officers that day? Did anyone hear anything unusual? Small details emerged: a comment about a dog barking earlier, a sighting of a marked car, a neighbor recalling a brief conversation. He stored each piece in his mind, piecing together a puzzle that was still incomplete. The dog's absence remained a constant presence in his mind. He thought about its loyalty, its trust, and the simple companionship that had been taken from him. That grief fueled his focus rather than distracting him. He understood that emotions could be tools if managed properly. Anger, sadness, even fear, all could sharpen awareness if harnessed with discipline. He allowed himself brief moments of mourning, then returned to observation, letting clarity dominate over impulse. Evening approached, and he returned home to analyze the information he had gathered. He created a small map of the neighborhood, marking potential vantage points, the location of witnesses, and the areas where officers had moved. He reviewed the sequence of events, considering alternate actions, motivations, and mistakes. The level of detail he applied would have been excessive for most people, but it was second nature to him. Years of training had instilled the habit of observation, anticipation, and precision in every action. He thought about the officers themselves. They had reacted hastily, assuming threat where there was none. That kind of error could have been fatal in his former world, but here it had resulted in grief and frustration. He cataloged their gestures, tones, and movements. He tried to understand them as one might study patterns in nature, predictable yet flawed. Understanding their behavior even now was part of control. He did not intend to act impulsively, but knowledge was the first step toward any future action. Night fell, and the apartment felt quiet, almost empty. He lit a small lamp and began reviewing his notes again. Each observation, each memory, each detail formed a mental framework. He considered possible interactions with law enforcement in the future, ways to communicate without losing control, and methods to ensure his safety and the safety of those around him. Every scenario was weighed carefully, every possibility catalogued, every mistake anticipated. This was not paranoia. It was preparation, and it brought a sense of calm amid grief. He remembered the discipline required in his past life, how one had to remain focused under extreme pressure, how every decision had consequences, and how patience was often the most powerful weapon. He applied those lessons now. The loss of his dog had stirred a deep primal grief, but it had not broken him. Instead, it reminded him of responsibility, loyalty, and the consequences of action. These were lessons from his past applied to the present, shaping his response in ways that most people could not understand. Late into the night, he moved through the apartment again, checking windows, doors, and exits. He did not expect danger, but awareness was instinctive. His movements were precise, quiet, deliberate. Each motion was a reminder of training that had once saved lives and now ensured clarity of thought. He considered the officer's perspectives, the potential errors, and the sequence of events. He wrote additional notes, revised observations, and refined diagrams. Every small piece added to a larger understanding. Grief remained, but it had transformed into focus. He thought of his dog, its loyalty and trust, and how those lessons applied to life beyond loss. Observation, patience, and careful planning were as important in this moment as they had been in dangerous missions. He considered next steps carefully, thinking of ways to engage with law enforcement if necessary, how to protect himself, and how to ensure mistakes like yesterday would not happen again. His mind moved constantly, disciplined, precise, and controlled. In the days that followed, he continued his routine with quiet intensity. He walked the streets, observed movements, and spoke discreetly with neighbors, gathering information. Each detail was stored mentally, cross-referenced, and analyzed. The world continued in its ordinary rhythms, unaware of the meticulous attention focused on understanding an incident that most would have forgotten. He remained calm, composed, and patient, knowing that clarity and knowledge were far more powerful than immediate action. Evenings were spent revisiting memories of his dog, acknowledging the grief but allowing it to inform his perspective rather than cloud judgment. He reflected on loyalty, responsibility, and trust. He considered how easily misunderstandings could escalate, and how discipline and patience could prevent them. The apartment became a quiet laboratory of thought, observation, and planning, each day building toward clarity and understanding. By the end of the week, he had constructed a detailed account of the incident, from the moment the officers arrived to the moment they left. He had considered alternate explanations, motives, and errors. He had created maps, documented behaviors, and cataloged details of the neighborhood and potential witnesses. His mind was clear, disciplined, and prepared. Grief had not disappeared, but it had sharpened his focus, reinforcing lessons from the past and shaping his response for the future. He spent late nights imagining how conversations with law enforcement could unfold. He considered questions they might ask, responses they might give, and the best way to maintain control and composure. Every possible scenario was reviewed and mentally rehearsed. Patience was the guiding principle. Observation was the tool. Knowledge was the weapon. His actions would be deliberate, precise, and informed, rooted in the discipline he had carried for years. By the second week, neighbors began to notice his unusual focus. Some whispered about the quiet man who spent hours observing, walking, and taking notes. They saw him as meticulous, perhaps obsessive, but no one understood the depth of skill, intelligence, and discipline he possessed. To them, he was just a man grieving a dog. They did not know that beneath the calm exterior was someone trained to survive, to anticipate, and to act with precision when necessary. He did not seek confrontation yet. There was no need. Observation and preparation were more important than emotion. He respected the power of restraint, understanding that immediate reactions could escalate situations unnecessarily. Each day built clarity, control, and understanding. His mind was focused, disciplined, and sharp. The world moved around him, unaware, as he quietly prepared for the